All right. Thank you guys so much for coming out and having me here tonight. So, if you haven't noticed, it's getting pretty cold outside. Has anyone taken out their gloves or anything to keep their hands warm or anything like that? Back there. So, when you put your gloves on, you probably weren't thinking, hey, I want to use this glove to play music. I'm guessing that was not what you were thinking. And so, I've invented SoundSpace gloves, which is a pair of gloves that are a musical instrument, but there wasn't ever a moment in my life where I was like putting on winter gloves and I was just like, yeah, this is a musical instrument. So I want to tell you a little bit about how this whole craziness came about and take you along in the little process that I went through in terms of actually creating these things. So like Caitlin said, I graduated from Cornell last year and I was studying physics and I was a music minor. And my degree was actually in engineering physics, so we had to do some like circuits classes and some engineering stuff. And for the longest time, I had considered kind of my two interests, engineering and music, as pretty distinct fields. One's like science, one's in art, and I didn't really see any combination between the two. That was until I took a circuits class that I had to take for my major, and for that class, we had a final project, just a 2-week project, where we could really build anything that we wanted to, just some kind of electronic circuit. And the professor showed some examples of what people had done in the past. And some of the examples that he showed were some music projects. So there's like a simple example of like, I don't know, someone like making a button controller to play music or something like that. And I was like, this is interesting. I can kind of put some music into my engineering. So for that project, I decided to make a kind of cello type instrument. Cello had always been my favorite instrument, though I never actually learned how to play it. So I made a kind of cello, and it was a really simple thing. It had like one string that was just this long pole that you could control notes with. And so after that 2-week project, I was like, okay, this is pretty cool. So I wanted to see if I could continue with that. So I went out and I found a professor in electrical engineering who was willing to mentor me in an independent study project over a semester to take that instrument and kind of build it out to be something a little bit more. So what I ended up building was my first musical instrument, which I call the saber. And it wasn't particularly sophisticated and definitely not particularly musical. But I can show you a little bit of what it is. It's basically just kind of that same string instrument, but with 4 strings like a cello. And there's a little demo of me talking about it.
Hi, my name is Ray Lee, and I built the saber. This is basically a musical instrument inspired by the cello. It's got 4 strings.
Which are conductive material?
Yes, it's special conductive fabric. And these basically serve as potentiometers for voltage taps that I have right here. So I'll have these fingertips that I wear, and basically when I contact this with the resistive material, it picks up a voltage, and there's a voltage range across each of these strings which can be controlled with these tuners.
And so you have tuners up at the top.
Yep, that's right.
Okay. And so you have 4 pickups, each one of which is independent, therefore.
Therefore, we can have 4-note polyphony, which means I can have multiple notes at one time, and I can actually have multiple notes on the same string.
Why don't you turn it on so we can hear that?
Yeah, sure. So here we have a note, and then I can put down another finger and have another note simultaneously.
All on the same string.
That's right. And that's different than a normal ribbon controller, which is like a very common thing. But the ribbon controller has this kind of fingertip thing attached to this, so you can have at most only 1 or 2-note polyphony, whereas this you have 4-note polyphony.
Mm-hmm. And this controller at the bottom is an analog strap you put on your hand. It has 4 slide controls on it.
That's right. So this is the right-hand controller. It's basically 4 slide controllers that allow me to control the amplitude of different harmonics. So here will be the fundamental, then this will be the second harmonic, first harmonic, second, third harmonic.
And then there's a joystick connection behind it for, what is that, master volume and...
So this whole joystick setup can really be set up to do anything. Like originally I was going to have it do distortion on the y-axis, but I wanted to go make it really intuitive. So what I have right now is that the left and right are left-right panning on the speakers, and then up and down is a low-pass filter.
So that's a little bit of the first instrument that I built, which, as you can tell, sounded a little bit like a dying mosquito. But it was the first thing I created, and I was pretty proud of it. And as you can probably see the cello influences there. It's got this cello strings, and then got the tuners at the top. And then the difference was that I substituted the bow with this joystick controller. The idea of the joystick was to give it some expressive control, similar to how a cellist can control the bow to be louder, softer, different articulations. I wanted to be able to kind of do different sound qualities, which I talked about in the video. So I made that instrument, and I was like, this is still pretty cool. So I started thinking about a project I could do for the next semester, a similar musical instrument. And originally my idea was just to take this instrument and improve it. So I started thinking about this joystick controller, and I was like, all right, how can I make this more expressive? How do I make this even more musical than it is? So I started thinking about things like, okay, what if I got rid of the joystick? What if I had like a camera there, or like a leap motion, if you guys know what that is, or some kind of motion sensing device that I could kind of like use my hand and gesturally to control sound. And then I started thinking, if I'm going to get rid of the joystick, what if I just got rid of the instrument itself? And the more I thought about that, the more it made sense to me. Because right now, if you think about electronic music instruments right now, we have the electric piano, the electric guitar, and all this stuff that references acoustic instruments. And to me, that started to make less and less sense, because if you think about acoustic instruments and why they were built and how they were designed to be acoustic resonators. They had to actually make sound. There had to be strings that you could pluck or something could hit and it would vibrate. But now that we have these things called the computer, and computers can make basically any sound that you can imagine, it didn't really make any more sense to me to continue to reference those instruments. So my thought process was like, okay, what if we forget about all the other instruments, and what if we just tried to think about how do we create the most expressive instrument from the ground up? Just what would that look like? So I started thinking about sound and how we express ourselves, and the first thought in my mind was, what if I could hold sound? What if it was this physical object between my hands that I could actually manipulate? And I could like muffle it, I could distort it to twist it, I could squeeze it down to make it quieter. And kind of thinking along those lines between this semester and the next semester, I came up with the idea for what I called the aura. The aura was exactly what I described. It was this instrument based on the idea that sound was a tangible object that you could hold between your hands and manipulate. And like all first prototypes go, the result was pretty terrible as well. But I did make something that worked. And the way that I did it was I was actually using these motion trackers from a golf game. It was like this golf game where there's like this golf club, and it was like the club was attached to a string, which was attached to a joystick, which like rotated as you moved it. So that was how it tracked you. It wasn't the most accurate motion tracker, but it was affordable and kind of let me do a little bit of what I wanted to. So I'll show you the first prototype of the aura.
Okay, so this is the basic setup.
And this is my friend Michael Indubuisi. He helped me a lot with the software side of all these projects.
Of the aura instrument, essentially we have the bass with 3 gain tracks. And we're using this to track the position and the orientation of Ray's hands while he's playing the instrument.
Yeah.
So you have some custom-built gloves here with flex sensors on them, and with angled devices, so that you can you get full 6-axis tracking. Okay.
Yeah, and then like this. And then there's flex sensors.
All right. So you've got all kinds of controls.
Yeah. And then the bass is basically just the game tracks taken apart, which are string potentiometers and joysticks that detect the angle, so you can get the basically spherical coordinates
Uh-huh.
of the...
Okay. Do you want to show me what sounds it makes here?
Yeah, sure. So,
Turn the sound on.
Okay.
volume. Pitch. Equalization.
Cool.
Stereo pairing. And we can actually EQ each channel individually.
Wow.
And the orientation doesn't work perfectly, but we could get it to detect a change in this.
Cool.
And our favorite thing about this is we learned how to play vibrato. We don't have it activated.
We actually had a concert the semester after that, and our tagline was, "What if you could literally drop the bass?" So as you can see, some more dying mosquitoes, and also extremely clunky. There were 3 strings coming out of each hand, and there was also wires, and it was kind of a mess, but it worked well enough to tell me that I was onto something and that there's something here to be explored. So the next prototype that I made, I started thinking about, all right, how do I get rid of these 3 wires? What's an alternative motion tracking? So with motion tracking, it's really easy to detect the orientation of something. So with your smartphones, most phones can detect how they're oriented, like if they're facing up or down, you know, which way gravity's pointing, which way north is. But it's very difficult to detect the actual position of something, meaning are you here, are you here, are you over there? So I started doing a lot of research on that front in terms of what type of positional trackers there were, and most of them were incredibly expensive. We're talking about like $50,000 systems here to track position. But somehow through contacting a lot of these motion tracking groups and companies, I landed on one that was a medical motion tracking company called Ascension Technology, and they make these magnetic motion trackers that are designed for guided surgeries. So I guess surgeries in cases where the doctors can't necessarily see where their hands are. Anyhow, so I used that device to create the next prototype, which is pretty much the same concept. It was the Aura version 2, that the idea was you could hold sound, but it was a little bit better of a motion tracker. So as you can see, a lot fewer wires, still wired, but definitely not 6 different things coming out of my hands. So we created the Aura, and we were like, okay, this is pretty cool. It's like I can actually hold sound and manipulate it. But then I was thinking, okay, we have this one instrument, and you can drop the bass, but you can only listen to a bass wobble for so long. So what if we expanded this to be more general? And this was kind of the quantum leap from the Aura, which still sounds kind of like dead mosquitoes, to SoundSpace, which is what I'll be presenting today. So SoundSpace is different than the Aura in that it's not really an instrument. It's more of a platform for creating instruments. So SoundSpace allows you to kind of customize the air around you and create different instruments that you can use and play with your hands. So I guess I can give a little bit of a demonstration of that. Kevin, I'm going to be unplugging the audio. Sounds.
Unless you need it.
No, I don't need it anymore. Okay. All right. So while that's loading up, I don't know if you guys can see right now, but this is the SoundSpace device. There's a magnetic motion tracker right here that emits a magnetic field, and then within the gloves, there's a magnetic sensor, this little guy right here, that picks up that magnetic field, and based on its readings, can figure out exactly where your hand is and how it's oriented. So I can demonstrate a few of the instruments here for you as soon as I get these things untangled. As you can see, it's still wired because I'm still working with the same motion tracker, but I am looking for some wireless options. So if anybody knows anything on that front, let me know. All right. All right. And there we go. Okay, great. So here's a kind of one kind of pad-like instrument, kind of like a ambient backing track that you can manipulate. Actually, get this playing. So this kind of lets you, still kind of the same concept of kind of holding the sound with my hands. And kind of a slightly different sound. So that's one instrument. I don't know why this is acting up on me right now. Here's another instrument that's kind of fun. So fun stuff right there. Another instrument. And here is kind of a, let me think about this, kind of a more of a bassy tone. And then, what else can I show? This is one of my favorite instruments. It's kind of like a lead solo instrument that I think really shows off the expressiveness of the instrument and kind of what the gloves enable you to do. And I think that instrument really shows off kind of what I sought to do originally with my vision, which was, you know, computers can generate incredible sounds, and really right now there's no interface that exists to really take advantage of that. We're stuck with these buttons, we're stuck with these knobs and these dials, and to me that seems just outdated. Like, I want to be able to control my sound as intimately as I control my voice, or a violinist controls their violin, and I want to be able to control it more intimately than that, with less virtuosic ability needed, we can say. So yeah, there's another instrument that I'm going to show, but I actually use all these instruments in a song called Fire that I'm going to perform for you guys right now. So in this song, nothing is pre-recorded except for two drum tracks and some audio samples, some vocal samples. But the rest of them, you'll probably notice some familiar instruments that I just demonstrated in the song. I'm not performing it yet. All right. So the headphones give me a metronome so that I can have something to keep time to, because I'm going to be recording on top of myself. All right. Well, thank you guys very much. So that is SoundSpace, and as you can tell, it's monumentally different from what I had shown you before, from the Aura, in which we took it, made it into something that can control more than one instrument and actually not sound like dying mosquitoes. So I guess where I'm at right now with this project is after I graduated, I came back home, moved in with my parents for a little bit, trying to turn this into a company, trying to see if I could, if there's business potential for this, if I could start selling this to DJs or whatever. So I spent about...
Millennial thing to do, right?
I guess so. But I spent about 4 months full-time working on that, assessing the business prospects, then ended up finding a job as a software developer, which kind of put this project on the back burner, but definitely still interested in moving forward with this. Actually talking right now about potentially getting some intellectual property for it, and trying to find better technologies that can eliminate the wires, get this thing to be more expressive so that it can move around and not be tied to one position. And then looking for opportunities to perform and get the word out there. So if anybody knows any DJs, Skrillex, someone else, let me know. And yeah, do you guys have any questions for me?